Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a look at something really interesting, a very specific dictionary, actually. Not everyday words, but the language of sexology.
Hmm.
One of our listeners shared this resource compiled by Dr. G.F. Pranzarone, and it draws heavily on Dr. John Money's work.
Right, the pioneering sexologist.
Exactly. And this isn't just about, dry clinical definitions. It's more about the words we actually use or sometimes avoid for this really fundamental part of life.
Yeah, that's a great point because our everyday talk about sex, gender, reproduction,
Yeah.
it can be so varied, right? So many nuances,
Mm.
which is fine, for art or whatever. But for science, you need precision. And that's where this dictionary sort of steps in, provides that clarity.
And what jumps out straight away is just how many different fields feed into this. Psychology, medicine, genetics.
Sociology, anthropology, biology.
It really shows you need all these different lenses to uh, properly grasp the subject, doesn't it?
Totally. It's like trying to figure out a complex machine. You can't just look at one part. Human sexuality isn't just one thing. It's woven from our biology, our minds, society, genes,
Right.
and the dictionary really reflects that whole breadth.
So to give us some structure for this deep dive, the dictionary groups terms into 5 main areas. We'll try to touch on each.
Okay.
First, there are terms for recognized psychiatric and medical sexological syndromes. Then we've got genetic and endocrine conditions relevant to sexology.
Mm-hmm.
After that, it's the language around attraction, love, pair bonding.
Mm.
Then paraphilia, which, some people might call kinky sex, maybe.
Yeah, that's the vernacular term, pretty much.
And finally, some anthropological terms describing specific groups or situations.
And the idea is, by digging into the specific vocabulary, we can pull out some really fascinating insights. It's almost like a shortcut,
A shortcut to understanding key sexology concepts without getting bogged down.
Exactly. Without reading tons of dense papers. Hopefully we'll hit some aha moments along the way.
Okay, let's dive in then, starting with that first group, psychiatric and medical sexological syndromes. One that jumped out at me was abuse dwarfism. What's that about?
Yeah, abuse dwarfism. It's quite stark, actually. It highlights this direct link between severe child abuse or neglect and significantly stunted growth.
Stunted growth, like physical growth.
Both physical and mental. It just powerfully shows how early trauma can mess with development right across the board.
Wow.
It's a real reminder, that our bodies and minds are so deeply linked. Serious adversity early on, it can leave biological marks.
Yeah, that's heavy. Okay, moving on. The term addiction. The definition here is interesting. It focuses on compulsive engagement with an object, a substance, person, whatever, rather than just the activity.
Right. And that shift in focus is pretty helpful, I think.
How so? In a sexological context.
Well, by focusing on the object of the addiction, it pushes us to look past just the behavior, like, say, frequent sex, and ask, what's the underlying drive?
Ah, okay. Like, is it about a specific type of stimulation? Or a person? Or maybe the feeling you get?
Exactly. And that distinction becomes really relevant when we get to terms like sexual addiction later. It makes you think, what exactly is the person dependent on?
Right, that makes sense. Okay, Alzheimer's disease is also listed here. The dictionary just notes it's linked to the degeneration of mental function. Seems a bit random. Why include it?
Well, if you think about the whole human lifespan, Alzheimer's reminds us that cognitive function can decline, right? And that decline affects everything, including sexuality. It's kind of a contrast to the other terms about development or function. Ultimately, the kind of degeneration you see in Alzheimer's would, inevitably impact sexual expression, intimacy, just like other forms of communication.
That's a sobering thought. But yeah, important context. Now, anorexia nervosa and bulimia. The source asks this really provocative question.
Oh, yeah, this one's interesting.
Could these eating disorders actually be a form of hypophilia, which is like deficient sex drive, maybe by somehow reversing puberty's effects? That's unexpected.
It really is, isn't it? It makes you wonder how different biological and psychological systems might connect in ways we don't usually consider.
So the idea is...
The idea, maybe, is that the behaviors leading to extreme weight loss and hormonal shifts, maybe they're an unconscious attempt to alter or suppress the physical changes and the emerging sexuality that comes with puberty.
Huh. So a really complex interplay between body image, control, and developing sexuality.
Potentially, yeah. Deeper than we might typically think.
Definitely gives you pause. Okay, next. Dyspareunia, defined as difficult or painful coitus. for both men and women, importantly.
Yes, though historically the focus was often just on women.
Right. And it also mentions coital migraine headache and a possible link, again, to hypophilia.
What's key there is recognizing painful intercourse isn't just a female issue. Acknowledging it in men, too, gives a more complete picture of sexual health challenges. And the potential hypophilia link. It suggests that pain or discomfort during sex might sometimes contribute to or even be a symptom of lower sexual interest generally. Highlights the need to look at both physical and psychological factors.
Gotcha. Then we have brief mentions of grand mal and petit mal seizures. What's the sexology connection here?
Well, this kind of sets the stage for later. When we talk about paraphilias, there have been some theories
Okay.
linking certain neurological conditions like some types of epilepsy affecting specific brain areas to the development or expression of some paraphilic interests. So just laying some groundwork here, really.
Okay, intriguing. We'll circle back to that. Let's move to multiple personality, or what we now usually call dissociative identity disorder, DID.
Right.
The definition mentions experiencing oneself as multiple distinct people with different behaviors, maybe amnesia between states.
Yeah, that fragmentation of identity.
And the dictionary brings up a potential link to paraphilic sex crimes happening in these altered states. It even gives an example of transvestophiles having distinct male and female personalities. That's quite something.
It is. It explores how these fragmented identities or altered states might intercept with sexual urges and behavior. It raises really complex questions about identity, self, responsibility. And that specific example, the transvestiphile one, it's particularly nuanced. It points to this fluidity, this complexity in both identity and sexual expression.
Definitely blurs some lines.
Okay.
Okay, last one in this section. Munchausen's syndrome, where people fake or induce illness symptoms in themselves.
Or in others, often children, by proxy.
Right. How is this relevant to sexology?
Well, it's not a sexual syndrome itself, obviously, but it touches on behavior, motivation, deception, things that absolutely can play out in sexual interactions.
Like someone faking a sexual history,
Right.
or exaggerating experiences, or even faking a dysfunction.
Exactly. For various underlying psychological reasons. It just reminds us that presentations around sex aren't always straightforward or purely biological. Psychology plays a huge role in how we present ourselves and our experiences here, too.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift gears then. Next category. Genetic and endocrine conditions with sexological significance. First up, ambiguous genitalia.
Yes, a key term.
Many people have probably heard it, but the definition is clear. A birth defect, sex organs not fully differentiated. It also clarifies that complete male and female external genitalia can't develop together in an embryo.
And it links it to hermaphroditism or intersexuality.
Right. Why is this so foundational?
Because it really drives home that sex development isn't always this simple binary switch. Ambiguous genitalia at birth shows how complex sexual differentiation is in the womb.
And that rigid male-female boxes don't always fit reality.
Precisely. The link to intersexuality is crucial. That's the broader term for people born with sex characteristics, chromosomes, gonads, hormones, genitals, that don't fit typical binary notions. It highlights the spectrum of human biological variation.
Okay. Then there's adolescent gynecomastia. Temporary breast enlargement in some teen boys due to hormones, usually minor, resolves itself.
Right, though rare cases might need surgery. And the dictionary notes the exact causes, how estrogen and testosterone are utilized, aren't totally clear.
So it's common, but still a bit mysterious hormonally.
Pretty much. It just shows that puberty is this really delicate hormonal balancing act, and even slight variations can cause visible changes. Reminds us puberty varies individually.
Makes sense. Next, brief definitions for the adrenal cortex and gland. They produce steroidal hormones, including some less potent sex hormones and cortisol, plus catecholamines. Seems like basic but essential background.
Absolutely essential. The adrenals are major players in our endocrine system. Their hormones have direct and indirect effects on sexual development, function, even desire. Understanding their basic job is key to grasping how problems with these glands can have big sexological consequences.
Hormone factories, basically.
Yeah, with diverse outputs affecting lots of systems, including sex-related ones.
Which leads us right into CAH, congenital adrenal hyperplasia.
A very significant one.
Explained as a genetic enzyme defect. Not enough cortisol, aldosterone, too many androgens, starting in fetal life.
Right.
And the dictionary details the effects. Ambiguous genitalia, virilization in females, premature puberty in males, and crucially, it mentions high mortality if untreated, and that glucocorticoid treatment is life-saving. Potential need for feminizing surgery, too. This sounds major.
CAH is absolutely critical with profound sexological impacts. That androgen overproduction really affects sexual development, especially for XX individuals.
But it can be life-threatening.
Without treatment, yes, which underscores why early diagnosis and intervention are so vital. And the mention of feminizing surgery, that reflects one medical approach to aligning physical appearance with gender identity for affected females, shows that complex interplay between biology and gender.
Okay. We also have cryptorchidism, undescended testicles, consequences, lack of sperm production, higher cancer risk.
Yeah, another important one for male sexual development. If the testes don't descend, the higher temperature in the body can hurt sperm production and raise malignancy risk. So early detection and surgery are key for fertility and health.
Makes sense. Chromosomal mosaicism is next, explained as having cells with different chromosome numbers in the same person. Toners and Klinefelters are given as examples.
This concept is really key for understanding variations in sex development.
Like having a genetic blueprint with slightly different instructions and different cell groups.
Exactly. It adds another layer of complexity. It means someone doesn't necessarily have the same genetic makeup in all their cells.
Leading to a spectrum of effects.
Right. You see that variability within conditions like Turner's and Klinefelters. It just shows our genetic reality isn't always a single, neat picture.
Got it. Then CVAH is just listed as a synonym for CAH. Good clarification. 5-reductase. Defined by its role converting testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, crucial for some androgen-dependent cells.
Think of it like an enzyme that fine-tunes testosterone's action in specific tissues.
Fine-tunes.
Yeah, that conversion to DHT is vital for developing certain male traits, external genitals in the fetus, later prostate growth, hair patterns. Deficiencies in this enzyme lead to variations in sexual development. Shows how critical these enzyme conversions are.
Okay, now the definition of hermaphroditism itself is quite detailed. Presence of genital attributes of both sexes, a birth defect, often now called intersexuality.
And it clarifies the distinctions based on gonad-type tests only, ovaries only, both or neither clearly differentiated.
And importantly, it stresses that human hermaphrodites do not have complete functional sex organs of both sexes.
Yes, that's a crucial clarification. Dispels common myths. It really underscores that intersexuality is a spectrum of conditions, not some mythical state. It's about biological diversity.
Very important point. Moving on, hypospadias. Birth defect of the urethral opening. In males, on the underside of the penis, in females, into the vagina. Notes severe male cases can look like an enlarged clitoris. That hyperspadias or epispadias is the opening being on the upper surface of the penis, contrasting with hypospadias.
Right. Both are congenital conditions affecting how the urethra forms. Understanding these different locations is important medically and also for appreciating the natural range of human anatomy. Subtle but significant developmental differences.
Okay, we visit Klinefelter syndrome as an example of chromosomal mosaicism. Reinforces that complexity point. Micropenis is defined as extremely small, gives measurements.
And notes potential links to hypospadias and hypoplastic corpora cavernosa, underdeveloped erectile tissue.
So it provides a clinical reference point and potential functional context.
Exactly. It gives a more complete picture.
Progestin-induced hermaphroditism. This is interesting, a historical link. Synthetic progestin use in pregnancy led to masculinized external genitals in some female fetuses.
Yeah, it's a fascinating kind of cautionary tale about unintended consequences of medical treatments during pregnancy. Shows how delicate that hormonal balance is during critical development periods.
Definitely. We get a brief definition of testis, male sex gland, sperm, and testosterone production. Fundamental. And finally, Turner's syndrome.
Right, 45X and mosaic variants.
Chromosomal anomaly in phenotypic females. Missing or partially deleted X chromosome. Leads to absent ovaries, short stature.
And the need for hormone treatment at puberty and usually infertility.
So another key example of chromosomal variations impacting sex development and reproduction in female presentation. The hormone treatment highlights their crucial role, and the fertility challenges are a major aspect.
Precisely.
Okay, let's move into the territory of attraction, love, and pair bonding. First terms, acceptive phase and acceptivity.
Part of that three-phase model.
Defined as the second phase in a sexual erotic relationship. Mutual acceptance, body contact, specifically genital contact and coitus. Follows the perceptive phase, precedes the conceptive.
So it's the phase of direct sexual engagement, where that initial seeking and soliciting the perceptive part can lead to actual physical connection and intimacy.
Right. Now, allosex avoidancy. This is interesting. A socially dictated constraint on personal disclosure to the other sex. The locker room nudity example is given.
Yeah, it highlights those unspoken social rules governing how we interact, our comfort levels around our bodies, especially with the opposite sex.
Rules we often follow without even thinking about it.
Exactly. The locker room example makes it relatable. Shows how society shapes our behavior around sex and bodies, even in seemingly private spaces.
Allure is next. Simply enticement, attractivity, linked to those perceptive phase behaviors.
Yep. It's that initial spark, the draw, the thing that makes someone appealing. It covers all those behaviors and signals that indicate interest and availability early on, gets the ball rolling.
Then we have androphilia and gynephilia, love of a man, love of a woman, respectively, by either sex, includes erotosexual bonding.
And directly linked to heterosexuality and homosexuality.
So these are the basic terms for the direction of attraction.
Pretty much. They offer a clear way to describe the primary focus of someone's sexual and romantic attraction, regardless of their own sex, foundational building blocks within that binary framework.
And building on that, androgynephilia, erosexual pairing with both men and women, serially or simultaneously, includes falling in love, encompasses bisexuality.
Right. This term offers maybe a more precise, inclusive way to talk about what's commonly called bisexuality. It explicitly acknowledges both romantic and sexual attraction to more than one gender, moves beyond a strict binary.
Okay, assortative mating. Mating based on matching features, behavior, mental traits.
Yeah, the birds of a feather flock together idea.
Basically, yeah.
And it's well documented in relationships. We often gravitate towards people who share our values, interests, even physical traits. That similarity can play a big role in forming and sustaining couples.
Coming out, explained as the gay vernacular term, acknowledging one's homophilic orientation to oneself and others.
A really significant personal and social step. That process of self-discovery, acceptance, and then sharing it, often transformative. A pivotal moment for many.
Complementation, the process of becoming and functioning differently and reciprocally to someone else, contrasted with identification, applied especially to gender identity role differentiation.
This highlights how people in a relationship can develop distinct but interlocking roles and interaction styles. It contributes to a functional, supportive dynamic. It's about how differences can actually enhance a partnership sometimes, create balance.
Interesting. Then the conceptive phase and conceptivity, the final phase, conception, pregnancy, birth, parenthood, contrasted with perceptive and acceptive.
This brings the potential reproductive outcome into the framework, acknowledges that biological dimension of sexual erotic relationships and the potential shift to parenthood, completes that biological cycle, potentially.
Courtship. Defined sexually as indicating attraction, inviting a reciprocal response.
Yeah.
Linked back to the perceptive phase.
Yeah, it's that initial dance, all those verbal and nonverbal cues we use to show interest and test the waters, see if it's mutual.
Falling in love.
Yeah.
Described as intense, maybe sudden attachment. Mutual or one-sided. Usually rotosexual. Linked to limerence.
That powerful, sometimes all-consuming emotional and physical pull, that exhilarating, sometimes agonizing state. And the limerence link points to the irrational, obsessive qualities it can have.
Heterophilia. Sexual erotic arousal dependent on a partner of the other morphologic sex. Synonym. Heteroerotic. Connects to heterosexualism.
The formal scientific term for attraction to the opposite sex.
And similarly, homophilia. Love and lust attached to those of the same sex. Connects to homosexualism.
The parallel term describing same-sex attraction.
Limerence itself gets a definition. The state of having fallen in love, being irrationally love-smitten, regardless of reciprocation, linked to infatuation.
Yeah, it really captures that intense, often unrequited, maybe almost delusional state of being head over heels for someone.
Love, defined broadly. Attachment, sacred profane, affectional erotic forms. Notes vernacular use as a synonym for like.
Acknowledges the huge spectrum, right?
Well,
From deep affection to intense erotic desire. How that one word covers so much ground.
monosexual, exclusively heterosexual or exclusively homosexual contacts, contrasted with bisexual, emphasizes a singular focus.
Describes individuals attracted to and engaging sexually with only one sex or gender.
Pair bonding, briefly a strong emotional attachment between two individuals, key for committed relationships.
That deep, enduring connection, often the foundation of long-term partnerships.
We revisit perceptive phase and proceptivity, initial stage, seeking soliciting interaction, behaviors indicating availability, attractivity, distinct from acceptive, conceptive.
Right. It's all about sending signals, actively seeking partners, setting the stage for more interaction, possible intimacy.
And finally, reciprocation, The mutual process of adaptation between partners. Synonym. Complementation underscores that dynamic give and take.
Yeah, both terms highlight that successful relationships need ongoing mutual adjustment, response, give and take between the people involved.
Okay, now we head into potentially less familiar territory, terms for paraphilia, conditions sometimes casually called kinky sex. This dictionary is very specific here.
Extremely specific, yeah. A whole detailed vocabulary.
Let's start with abasiophilia. Paraphilic arousal contingent on a partner being lame or crippled, notes the reciprocal, autoabasiophilia.
Right, and that concept of a reciprocal paraphilia being aroused by having the condition yourself, that's a fascinating aspect of some of these interests. Shows how specific things can become linked to arousal.
Then acrotomophilia, arousal from a partner being an amputee, reciprocal, podonophilia, desire for self-amputation.
Again, very specific, highlights the diverse, sometimes extreme ways arousal can get tied to particular physical traits or desires.
Adolescentialism, paraphilic. Arousal from impersonating an adolescent and being treated as one, categorized as stigmatoceligibilic, linked to other age-related ones like ephebophilia.
That stigmatoceligibilic label suggests arousal is tied to a perceived ineligibility or characteristic of the partner, often age or status related. Here, it seems centered on enacting an age-related power dynamic through role play.
Okay. Andromimetophilia, arousal from an andromimetic partner, a female impersonating a male or a female-to-male trans partner. Counterpart, genomimetophilia.
These terms show how attraction can be linked to specific gender presentations, crossing traditional roles. Also hints at a distinction between attraction to impersonation versus attraction to someone identifying as trans.
Autogonistophilia, arousal from being observed, on stage, on camera. Reciprocal is scoptophilia misoscopia, arousal from watching others.
Yeah, this pair deals with exhibitionistic and voyeuristic interests, the interplay between seeing and being seen as the source of arousal.
Autonepiophilia,
Yeah.
impersonating a baby in diapers, being treated as one for arousal, linked potentially to masochism. Reciprocal, nepiophilia.
Also called paraphilic infantilism, a very specific form of age-related role play, often involving themes of regression, submission, or caregiving.
Biastophilia, arousal dependent on surprising and violently assaulting a non-consenting stranger. Notes acquiescence reduces arousal. Predominantly heterosexual, synonym. Raptophilia, may overlap with predatory paraphilias.
This one is particularly disturbing, obviously, as it explicitly involves non-consent and violence.
Right.
It's a very concerning paraphilia due to the potential for significant harm. The lack of a realistic reciprocal condition underscores its non-consensual nature.
Catheterophilia,
Yeah.
arousal from having a catheter inserted into the urethra, linked to urethral,ism.
Shows how even medical procedures or objects can become the focus of sexual interest for some. Highly specific stimuli.
Sharambo-Kandinsky syndrome, a limerent fixation on someone unattainable, plus a false conviction of reciprocal love and feeling controlled by them, linked to erotomania.
This seems to blend intense, often delusional romantic obsession with paraphilic elements. The unattainable object, the feeling of being controlled without basis in reality. A complex intersection.
Crematistophilia, arousal from being charged forced to pay or being robbed by the sexual partner for services. No technical term for the reciprocal noted.
This links arousal specifically to financial transactions, often involving coercion or exploitation. The lack of a reciprocal term highlights that particular power dynamic.
Chronophilia, an umbrella term. Paraphilias, where the person's sexuerotic age focus is discordant with their own age, but matches the partner's age. Includes infantilism, nepiophilia, pedophilia, ephebophilia, gerontophilia.
Right, a useful overarching category for understanding paraphilic interests centered on specific age groups.
Coprophilia, simply paraphilic arousal related to feces.
Direct, yeah. Sexual interest in feces.
Erotic self-strangulation, asphyxiophilia, hypoxophilia, dependence on partial asphyxiation, or fantasy of it, for arousal. Notes high risk of accidental death, occasional association with cross-dressing, linked to autoerotic death.
Definitely a high-risk practice. The potential for accidental fatality is significant. And the noted link with cross-dressing suggests a possible interplay with gender identity for some individuals.
Exhibitionism, pedophilia. Arousal from eliciting surprise shock by illicitly showing erotic body parts, including genitals, to a stranger. Reciprocal. Voyeurism.
A more widely recognized one, characterized by that recurring urge to expose oneself to unsuspecting people for arousal.
Fetishism. Arousal contingent on a talisman, object, substance, or partner's body part. No term for the reciprocal where the fetish belongs to the self. Linked to partialism.
A broad category, this one, covers a huge range of specific interests, where arousal becomes strongly, often necessarily, focused on non-genital objects or specific body parts. The mind makes a strong sexual link to something not inherently sexual.
Right. Formicophilia. Specialized zoophilia. Arousal from small creatures crawling on genitalia appearing on area nipples. Dictionary questions if it's solely zoophilia.
Very specific, very unusual. Blurs the lines maybe between attraction to animals and fascination with particular tactile sensations.
Frauderism. Arousal from rubbing against a stranger's body, SPA genitals, in a crowd. No reciprocal term noted. Linked to toucherism. Involves non-consensual contact.
Yes, seeking gratification by rubbing against someone without consent in a public place.
Gerontalism, paraphilic.
Yeah.
Arousal from impersonating an older person, being treated as one. Stigmatosologibilic, linked to other age paraphilias.
This is the role-playing aspect connected to gerontophilia, enacting an elderly role for arousal, often with a partner attracted to older individuals.
And gerontophilia itself.
Wow.
Paraphilic arousal, where the partner must be parental grandparental age. Reciprocal, paraphilic gerontalism.
The paraphilic attraction specifically to elderly individuals.
Dynamemetaphilia, arousal dependent on a gynomemetic partner, male impersonating female, or male to female trans partner. Counterpart, andromemetaphilia.
Mirrors the earlier one, focuses on attraction to specific expressions of female gender, including by individuals assigned male at birth.
Ibristophilia, arousal from being with a partner known to have committed an outrage crime. Partner could be convicted or even instigated to commit a crime.
The extreme attraction to bad boys, girls phenomenon, essentially. Sexual attraction to those who've committed crimes or violence.
Infantilism, paraphilic, autonepophilia, and juvenilism, paraphilic, redefined as arousal from impersonating an infant or juvenile, respectively, and being treated as such.
More age-related role-play paraphilias.
Kleptophilia, arousal from illicitly entering and stealing from a stranger's dwelling, potential partner, may or may not involve forceful sexual demands. No reciprocal term.
Links arousal to the act of stealing itself, often from someone who is the object of attraction. The theft, the risk, is the primary source of arousal.
Lust murderism. Homicidophilia, erotophilia, where dependence on sadistic homicide or fantasy for arousal. Noted in heterohomosexual contexts, not bisexual. Contrasted with autoassassinatophilia.
Exceptionally rare, extremely violent, and severely disturbing. Sexual gratification derived from the act of killing.
Mexoscopia. Scoptophilia, scoptolania. Arousal from watching others have sex. Reciprocal. Antagonistophilia.
Revisits that voyeuristic theme, focusing on observing sexual activity between others for arousal.
Misophilia. Arousal from self-degradation, defilement using soiled clothing or menstrual items. Overlaps with coprophilia or philia. No term for being the provider.
Involves sexual interest in filth, soiled items, often linked with the desire for self-degradation.
Narratophilia. Arousal from using dirty language as stories with a partner. Same term applies reciprocally. Being aroused by hearing grating. Linked to pictophilia.
Highlights the power of language. Focuses on explicit or suggestive language and stories as the main source of stimulation.
Necrophilia. Arousal contingent on a corpse. No reciprocal except fantasy. Emphasizes obsession with death itself, not necessarily killing.
Deeply disturbing. Sexual attraction to corpses.
Nepiophilia. Like pedophilia, but restricted to infancy. Reciprocal. Autonepiophilia, paraphilic, infantilism.
A very specific, highly problematic age-related paraphilia focusing on infants.
Piedactophilia. Reiterated as arousal from illicitly exhibiting the penis to elicit shock surprise. Notes lack of terms for staring at the penis or female genital exhibitionism.
Reinforces the definition of that specific form of male exhibitionism.
Pictophilia. Arousal from viewing dirty pictures movies, alone or with partner. Same term applies reciprocally, showing erotica, linked to narratophilia.
Highlights the role of visual stimuli. Focuses on erotic visual materials as a source of stimulation.
Rhinophleurism, urophilia undinism, sexual erotic stimulation from the odor of urine.
Specific attraction to a bodily fluid and its scent. Urophilia.
Scoptophilia. Redefined as arousal from watching others have sex, stressing it's not necessarily surreptitious, unlike voyeurism.
Clarifies that nuance. Observation isn't necessarily secret, differentiating it from voyeurism's covert nature.
Somnophilia. Sleeping princess syndrome. Arousal from intruding on and caressing oral sex, no force, a sleeping stranger upon awakening them. Reciprocal rare in reality.
A non-consensual interaction involving arousal from interacting sexually with someone asleep.
Symphorophilia. Arousal from stage managing the possibility of disaster, fire, accident, and watching.
Mhm.
Same term for arranging to be at risk as a victim.
Very unusual. Links arousal to creating or witnessing potential danger or disaster. Fascination with risk.
Telephonocophilia. Telephone scatophilia. Arousal from tricking someone on the phone into explicit sexual conversation. Usually a nuisance, not dangerous. No term for inviting charging for such calls.
Involves arousal from explicit phone conversations, often initiated deceptively, non-physical interaction via technology.
Transvestism. Transvestiphilia. Cross-dressing for sexual erotic arousal. Believed mostly in men. No term for being aroused by a cross-dressed partner. Categorized as fetishistic talismanic.
Wearing clothing traditionally associated with the opposite sex, specifically for sexual gratification, using clothing for arousal.
And finally, voyeurism. Arousal from the risk of discovery while covertly watching a stranger undress or have sex. Reciprocal exhibitionism.
The classic peeping Tom scenario. Sexual arousal from secretly watching others without their knowledge or consent.
Okay, our last category delves into anthropology. Terms for special populations or situations. Occult. Burmese name for a full-time female impersonator. Gynomemetic. Linked to bird egg, hydra, zenith.
Introduces us to specific cultural terms for individuals embodying gender roles outside the Western male-female binary. Cross-cultural phenomenon.
Bird egg, briefly mentioned. Term used in some cultures for individuals with non-binary gender roles. Implied association with the others.
An older anthropological term, sometimes contested now, but used to describe individuals in some indigenous cultures fulfilling mixed or third gender roles.
Hydra, Indian name. Full-time female impersonator, sometimes a eunuch with partial surgery. Part of a traditional social organization. Specific deity, sexual erotic role with men. Linked to others.
Shows a more structured social role. The Hydra in India are a culturally recognized third gender with specific roles, traditions, even religious significance.
And lastly, Xanath. Arabic term, often translated as male homosexual. Men who partially impersonate women. Clothes, manner, lifestyle, sexual erotic role with other men. Linked again.
Another cultural variation represents another example in some Arabic cultures of a recognized gender role outside the strict binary, with specific social and sexual dynamics in their communities.
Well, that was a truly comprehensive journey through this terminology, wasn't it?
It really was.
It's remarkable just how detailed and extensive this vocabulary is. It offers a precision far beyond our everyday chat about sexuality.
Absolutely. This deep dive really underscores the sheer complexity of understanding something as fundamental as human sexuality, from our genes and hormones, all the way to the vast, diverse ways attraction and eroticism are expressed across cultures. There's a whole universe captured in these terms.
And it was fascinating seeing some of those unexpected connections pop up, like the potential link between eating disorders and low sexual erotic interest.
Right, or the possible neurological basis for some paraphilias.
It really makes you think about how interconnected everything is, biology, psychology, social context when it comes to sex.
Yeah, and what's insightful, I think, is that having this more precise, nuanced language, maybe it can help us have more informed conversations. Perhaps even reduce some of the stigma that unfortunately still clings to many diverse sexual experiences and conditions.
Moving beyond simple labels.
Exactly. Appreciating the rich tapestry. Understanding these terms might help.
It certainly gives you a lot to mull over. So for our final provocative thought for you, our listener, maybe consider how the very existence of this specialized language reflects our ongoing society's attempt to understand and categorize something so deeply personal, yet so universal as sexuality.
What does it say about us?
What does it tell us about what we find easy to talk about versus what stays, in the shadows? Which of these terms or concepts resonated most with you and why? Definitely worth some personal reflection on this vast, fascinating territory we've just skimmed the surface of.